The world was on fire. Smoke rolled across the jagged skyline of a village reduced to rubble, the air thick with the acrid stench of burning fuel and scorched earth. The gunfire had slowed, the echoes fading into the distance, leaving only the unsettling hum of silence that always followed battle. Navy SEAL medic Jackson Kane moved cautiously through the destruction, his rifle slung at his side, eyes sweeping the ruins for movement. His heart beat steady, not from lack of fear, but from years of discipline. Chaos was his battlefield, and silence often meant danger. Jackson crouched low behind the charred skeleton of a collapsed wall. His boots crunched on shattered glass, and he froze, listening. The wind carried faint voices in the distance, his team clearing nearby buildings, but something else tugged at his instincts. It wasn't sound more like a presence. Years of combat had sharpened him to feel when something alive lingered among the dead. He shifted his weight, scanning the debris. Then he saw her. At first, she seemed like nothing more than another casualty sprawled against the broken stones of a collapsed home, her clothes torn and dark with blood. But her chest rose faintly in steady rhythm. Alive, Jackson's medic instincts kicked in, and he hurried forward, dropping to his knees beside her. Her face was streaked with dirt and ash, her hair matted and tangled. Yet her eyes, the moment they opened, made him hesitate. They weren't the eyes of a terrified civilian. Her gaze locked on him with startling clarity, sharp and unwavering, as though she were assessing him, judging his intent. Most wounded cried out in confusion, panic, or relief. But she stayed silent. Not a sound passed her lips, even as his gloved hands pressed against the bleeding wound in her side. "Easy," Jackson muttered, working quickly. "I've got you." No response. Not even a flinch. Blood seeped between his fingers as he applied pressure, but her breathing stayed calm and controlled. It was the kind of breathing he taught his teammates to use under duress, when pain threatened to take control. Inhale deep, exhale slow. A method to keep focus in the chaos. But how would a civilian know that? Jackson studied her as he worked. Her clothes were dusty, torn from shrapnel, but beneath them he caught glimpses of a physique honed by training, not simple labor. Her arms weren't soft or frail. They carried the subtle definition of someone accustomed to physical strain. And her silence wasn't weakness. It was deliberate. He reached for his comms. Got a survivor. Female, mid-20s, wounded, extracting now. Static buzzed, and a teammate's voice replied, "Copy. Bring her in. Make it quick." Jackson slid his arms beneath her, lifting carefully. She was lighter than expected, but every movement was calculated on her part. Even wounded, she adjusted her weight to help him carry her, relieving strain on his grip without him asking. Odd, very odd. As he moved through the ruins, he felt her eyes on him. Not pleading, not desperate, just watching, measuring. He'd seen eyes like that before, in the men beside him on missions. Soldiers' eyes. Back at the temporary encampment, the team gathered as Jackson laid her on a cot inside a makeshift shelter. A few of the SEALs crowded closer, curiosity flickering in their expressions. Survivors weren't uncommon, but something about her presence demanded attention. "Who is she?" One of them muttered. "Local?" Another asked. Jackson ignored them, focusing on the wound. He tore away fabric to expose the injury. A gunshot lodged high in her side. The bullet hadn't hit anything vital, but blood loss would take her if he didn't act fast. He unpacked his field kit, working swiftly with sterile gauze and surgical tools. Still, she never cried out. He threaded a needle, stitching with precision, expecting at least a flinch. Instead, she locked her gaze on the shelter's entrance, alert for movement outside. Pain didn't control her. Her silence was more unsettling than any scream could have been. The SEALs exchanged glances. "She hasn't said a word?" "Nope," Jackson replied, not looking up. Not one. Maybe shock. Jackson shook his head. This isn't shock. When he finished closing the wound, he leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. He studied her once more. Scars marked her arms and shoulders, old ones long healed. Thin white lines crisscrossed her skin, the kind soldiers carried from years of training in combat. Not the marks of a villager caught in crossfire. His medic's eye caught details others might miss. The thickened calluses on her palms, the faint discoloration on her knuckles from repeated impact. This woman had fought, had trained, had endured things civilians never touched. Jackson felt a weight in his chest. Who was she? And why here, among ruins, alone? He crouched low, speaking softly. What's your name? Her lips parted, but no sound came. For a heartbeat, he thought she might finally break her silence. Instead, she closed her mouth again, eyes narrowing with quiet defiance. Jackson exhaled slowly. She wasn't just unwilling, she was protecting something. A secret. One of the SEALs, Torres, crossed his arms. She's trouble. Look at her. Doesn't scream, doesn't talk. She's hiding something. She's alive, Jackson countered firmly. That's all that matters right now. But in truth, he shared Torres's unease. Every instinct told him she didn't belong to this story of civilians and casualties. She belonged to something else, something buried in shadows. That night, as the team rotated watch, Jackson stayed close to her cot. He pretended to review his notes, but in reality, he observed her. Even in sleep, her posture betrayed training. She didn't sprawl out or collapse in exhaustion. She rested with purpose, her body angled, hands near her torso, as though prepared to spring awake at any moment. She wasn't broken. She wasn't helpless. She was waiting. Jackson leaned back against the cold wall, staring at the woman who had dropped into their world like a ghost, silent, wounded, unshaken. Something about her unsettled him more than the day's battle. Because in his gut, he knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary survivor. This was the beginning of something none of them were prepared for. The night dragged on, heavy with tension. Inside the shelter, the crackle of a small lantern cast shifting shadows across the canvas walls. Jackson sat on an overturned ammo crate, eyes fixed on the woman resting on the cot. She was alive, but not ordinary, that much was clear. Even in her weakened state, she didn't sleep like the others. Her breathing was measured, slow, and unnervingly steady. Every rise and fall of her chest seemed intentional, as if her body obeyed an inner rhythm no wound could break. Jackson had treated countless survivors across his deployments. Most whimpered through pain, cried out for family, or begged for water and relief. Not her. She was a fortress of silence, and that silence screamed louder than words ever could. When dawn crept in, painting the sky with muted streaks of gray, the rest of the SEALs gathered around for their morning brief. The team leader, Lieutenant Brooks, cast a wary glance at their guest before speaking. She still hasn't said a word? Jackson shook his head. Not one. But she's stable. Torres, always blunt, spat into the dirt. Stable doesn't mean safe. Civilians don't stare down fire like that. And they sure as hell don't stay quiet with a bullet hole in their gut. The others murmured their agreement, eyes flicking toward her. She sat upright now, ignoring the dull ache in her side. Her posture was impossibly straight, her eyes sweeping the camp with slow precision. Not frantic, not lost aware. Maybe she's in shock, another suggested. Jackson crossed his arms. I know shock. This isn't it. He wanted to defend her, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe curiosity. Something in him couldn't let their suspicion turn into action. Not yet. The woman shifted slightly, drawing every gaze. She reached for the cup of water near her cot, but the way she moved was what froze Jackson. Even weak, she kept her motion tight, deliberate, like someone conserving energy in hostile territory. Her eyes darted, not in fear, but in calculation. Brooks frowned. "Jackson, you're our medic. What's your read?" Jackson hesitated. His instinct screamed the truth. She had training. But without evidence, saying so would spark distrust he couldn't control. "She's tough," he answered carefully. "Probably tougher than most we've seen. But until she talks, I can't give you more than that." The lieutenant didn't look satisfied, but he nodded. "Fine, keep her alive. But watch her. If she's a threat, I want to know before it's too late." Later that day, Jackson tried again. He approached slowly, crouching beside her cot. Her eyes met his, cool and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "You've been through hell. But I need something your name. Just your name." Her lips parted slightly, as though the words lingered at the edge. But then, just as quickly, she shut them again. Silence. Jackson studied her hands. They weren't trembling. No signs of fear. Instead, she tapped her index finger lightly against the rim of the cot, rhythmic, precise. A code? A habit? He couldn't tell, but it wasn't random. "You're not like the others," he murmured. Her gaze sharpened. Torres approached, scowling. "Waste of time, Doc. She doesn't want to talk." He leaned in closer to her, his voice hard. "Who the hell are you?" She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared straight through him, the silence heavier than words. Torres cursed under his breath and backed away, unnerved. Jackson caught it, though the faintest twitch of her jaw, the subtle tightening of her fists. She wasn't indifferent. She was holding back. By afternoon, the team moved to secure the outskirts of the camp. Jackson remained with her, patching her dressing. As he peeled back the bandage, she winced slightly, her first visible reaction to pain. But even then, she refused sound. "Most people scream," Jackson said, tying the gauze. Her eyes flicked to him, almost amused. "Not you," he continued. "You breathe through it. That's training." Her expression didn't change, but the silence between them shifted. He felt it a kind of acknowledgement, even if she wouldn't say it aloud. That evening, the camp came under brief harassment, fire nothing heavy, just potshots from enemy scouts testing their perimeter. The SEALs responded quickly, returning fire until the attackers retreated. Jackson rushed back inside the shelter, checking on her. What he found stopped him cold. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't curled into herself like any civilian would under sudden gunfire. Instead, she had slid from the cot and taken cover low against the wall, eyes locked on the entry, her breathing calm. She even angled herself where she had a clear line of sight, defensive, strategic. "Damn it," Jackson whispered. When the shooting ceased, she returned to her cot as if nothing happened, adjusting the bandage at her side. Jackson approached, lowering his voice. That wasn't shock. That wasn't instinct. That was training. "You've done this before." Her silence was answer enough. By nightfall, unease spread through the team. They kept their distance from her, whispering in hushed tones. Some wanted her gone, worried she was a spy or worse. Others, though reluctant, admitted she'd shown unusual resilience. Jackson sat alone outside the shelter, staring at the dark horizon. His thoughts circled endlessly. He wanted answers, but he also knew the truth, when it came, would change everything. She was no ordinary survivor. That much was undeniable. But why remain silent? What secret was she protecting so fiercely that not even a bullet wound could break her? Inside, she lay awake, eyes open, listening to every word spoken beyond the canvas walls. She heard their suspicion, their doubt. And she endured it, because silence was her weapon. Words could betray her. But silence? Silence kept her alive. Jackson glanced back one last time before turning in. Their gazes met across the dim shelter. She didn't look away. Neither did he. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't fear. It was a challenge. The desert night pressed heavy against the canvas shelter, but inside, the lantern's glow painted every detail in sharp relief. Jackson leaned forward, peeling away the blood-soaked bandage from the woman's side. He worked slowly, carefully, his hands precise from years of field surgeries. Every movement was meant to save her life, but his eyes were studying more than the wound. She sat upright, without needing instruction, holding her posture with quiet control. No shifting, no fidgeting, no involuntary jerks. He had treated hardened operators who couldn't keep still through pain like hers. Yet here she was, calm as stone. The bullet wound itself wasn't the only thing catching his attention. It was what lay beneath the story her body told. As Jackson cleaned the wound, his gaze drifted across her arms and shoulders. Scars, not just one or two, but dozens of them. Faint white lines etched across her skin like hidden maps. They weren't random. These were patterned, deliberate, earned. Rope burns across the forearms, faded bruising at the elbows, long-healed cuts from blades. A lattice of survival carved into her flesh. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but inside, suspicion clawed at him. Civilians didn't carry scars like these. These weren't the marks of someone caught in a single tragic firefight. These were years in the making. "You've seen combat before," he murmured under his breath, more to himself than her. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp and unreadable. She didn't answer, of course. She hadn't spoken a single word since he found her. But the silence itself felt like an answer. Jackson threaded his needle, preparing to close the wound with a second line of stitches. He pricked her flesh, expecting at least a twitch. Nothing. Her gaze never wavered. She exhaled in a slow rhythm, synchronizing her breath with each stitch. He'd seen that before in training rooms, where soldiers learned to control their pain through breathing techniques. His suspicion hardened. "You're not a villager," he said softly, continuing his work. "Not a farmer. Not a bystander. You're what? Special forces? Contractor? Something blacklisted?" Her jaw tightened, just for a moment. The first crack in her silence. Torres pushed through the canvas flap, carrying a tray of supplies. He froze when he saw Jackson leaning close to her, his voice low. "What are you whispering about, Doc?" Jackson straightened quickly. "Just treating her." Torres narrowed his eyes at the woman. "You're wasting your time. She's hiding something. You can see it, can't you?" Jackson's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to brush off the suspicion, but Torres wasn't wrong. He could see it. Every medic's instinct screamed it. But he wasn't ready to hand her over to suspicion. "Not yet. She's wounded," Jackson said evenly. "That's all you need to know." Torres snorted. "Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of wounded. Never seen one sit there like a damn statue." He shoved the supplies down on the table and left. Jackson exhaled slowly, returning his focus to her. "You're making this hard for me," he whispered. "If you'd just talk, just give me something I could protect you." Still nothing. Only those eyes, steady and defiant. Later, as he replaced her bandages, he decided to test her. He shined his penlight suddenly into her pupils, moving it quickly side to side. A civilian would have flinched, pulled away. She didn't. Instead, she adjusted her breathing and tracked the light smoothly, her eyes narrowing just slightly, as though predicting his movements. He tested again, pressing unexpectedly near her wound. Most would gasp or jolt. She only shifted her weight, redistributing tension through her shoulders to minimize the pain. That wasn't instinct. That was training. Jackson sat back, shaking his head. "Who the hell are you?" For the first time, she gave him something barely perceptible, but real. The corner of her mouth curved, not into a smile, but into the faintest smirk, as if she knew he was unraveling her secret, piece by piece. That night, Jackson couldn't sleep. He sat outside the shelter, staring at the endless horizon. His teens' voices murmured around the fire, their words filled with suspicion. Brooks wanted answers. Torres wanted her gone. The others didn't trust what they didn't understand. Jackson replayed every detail in his mind. The breathing, the posture, the scars, the reflexes. None of it belonged to a civilian. She was trained like them, maybe even beyond. And yet, why was she here? Alone? Silent? Morning came with a cruel test. During a supply check, Jackson noticed something odd. A knife, part of their field kit, had gone missing. He scanned the camp until his gaze fell on her. She sat quietly on the cot, but in her hand, tucked low against her thigh, the blade glinted in the early light. He moved toward her slowly, crouching. "That's mine," he said softly. She didn't threaten him, didn't brandish it. She simply rotated the blade in her fingers, her grip perfect. Too perfect. Thumb resting against the spine, wrist angled to strike or defend in a heartbeat. She wasn't holding it like an amateur. She was demonstrating. When she finally set it down, she didn't look ashamed or apologetic. She looked at him as if daring him to acknowledge what he'd just seen. Jackson's chest tightened. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't luck. The truth was undeniable now. She was trained. That night, as the camp quieted again, Jackson sat alone with her inside the shelter. He spoke in a low, steady tone. "I know what you are. You're not here by accident. You've been through training, real training. The scars, the breathing, the reflexes. I've seen it all before, in my own brothers." Her eyes softened, just slightly. For the first time, there was no defiance in her gaze-only recognition. She knew he was right. But why hide it? He pressed. Why silence? What are you protecting? Her lips parted as though she might answer, but instead, she closed her eyes and leaned back against the cot. The conversation was over. Jackson leaned forward, whispering one last thing before stepping out. "Whoever you are, whatever you're hiding, it won't stay hidden forever." And as he left the shelter, he knew with chilling certainty, the woman wasn't just a survivor. She was a soldier. And sooner or later, the rest of the team would find out. The desert night was deceptively calm. A chill wind stirred the sand, carrying with it a faint echo of gunfire from miles away. Inside the shelter, Jackson sat hunched over his medic's log, though the pen in his hand hadn't touched the page in hours. His mind wasn't on records. It was on her. She lay on the cot, eyes closed but not asleep. Jackson knew the difference. He'd seen too many soldiers rest with that same kind of stillness, eyes shut, body alert, every sense tuned to the environment. She wasn't drifting. She was listening, always listening. A SEAL medic rubbed his temples. The evidence stacked in his mind like bricks. Scars, discipline, reflexes, silence. It wasn't just training. It was specialized. But what program? What unit? He had never met a woman who moved like her. Never treated one who bore those kinds of marks. A voice from the fire outside pulled him back to the present. Torres again, low and insistent. "I'm telling you, something's off about her. Civilians don't act like that. You saw how she handled the knife. You saw it." Another teammate answered, "What are you suggesting? That she's enemy?" "I'm suggesting she's not who she looks like. Maybe she's intel. Maybe she's a plant. Hell, maybe she's been trained by them. Jackson clenched his jaw. He couldn't let their paranoia spiral. But he also couldn't deny they were right about one thing. She wasn't who she looked like. Hours later, Jackson sat outside the shelter, staring at the dark horizon. Brooks, the lieutenant, sat beside him, nursing a canteen. "You're quiet tonight, Doc." Jackson hesitated before speaking. "Do you ever hear stories? About programs? Ones nobody admits to?" Brooks glanced at him, frowning. "You'll have to be more specific." Jackson lowered his voice. "Back in Bud, I heard whispers. They tried at once running female candidates through a parallel track. Same brutality. Same standards. Officially, it was shut down. No candidates made it through. That's what they told us." Brooks let out a humorless laugh. "And you think she's one of those ghosts?" "I don't think," Jackson said firmly. "I know. Look at her. That kind of control doesn't come from nowhere. Somebody forged her into what she is." The lieutenant went quiet, staring into the fire. Finally, he muttered, "Programs like that don't just vanish. They bury them. Which means if she's one of them, and if she's alive, then someone out there has a hell of a secret to protect." Back in the shelter, Jackson studied her again. He saw her body twitch faintly, not from pain, but memory muscles flexing like ghosts of training past. He could almost imagine it, a younger version of her, running obstacle courses in the dead of night, boots soaked with seawater, lungs burning. Instructors shouting, punishing, pushing her past the brink. Rope burns on her hands from endless climbs. Knuckles raw from striking until skin tore. Each scar on her body whispered of those nights. And then something darker. Missions unspoken. Maybe one went wrong. Maybe that's why she vanished, erased from records. Jackson swallowed hard. He wasn't just looking at a survivor. He was looking at living proof that the whispers were true. The next morning, tension rippled through camp when one of the scouts returned with news. Enemy movement nearby. The squad prepared for contact. Jackson remained with her, torn between duty and curiosity. As he tightened the bandage at her side, he spoke quietly. "I know you can hear me. I know you understand every word. You don't have to say it out loud. Just give me something." Her eyes opened, piercing him. For the first time, he saw emotion flash a brief storm of pain, anger, and defiance. She wanted to answer. He knew it, but still, silence held her lips closed. "Why?" he whispered. "Why keep it buried?" Her only response was a faint shake of the head, almost imperceptible. Not no, not yes. Something in between. That night, Jackson dreamed. He saw flashes, women running side by side in the surf, sand grinding into their skin. He saw instructors breaking them down with brutal precision, testing who would quit and who would endure. He saw her always gritting her teeth, enduring beyond reason, climbing ropes until her palms bled, plunging into icy water until her body went numb. And then the dream shifted. Gunfire, a mission gone wrong, shadows of betrayal, orders to disappear. A silence forced upon her, not chosen. Jackson woke with a start, sweat soaking his shirt. He turned toward the cot. Her eyes were open, watching him. For a long moment, neither spoke. But he knew, deep down, that his dream wasn't far from her truth. The following day, the squad debated what to do with her. Brooks wanted her kept under close watch. Torres argued she was a liability. Jackson stepped in. "She's not a threat. If she wanted to harm us, she had opportunities. She didn't." Torres snapped back. "Then what is she?" "Because she's not innocent, and you damn well know it." Silence fell heavy. Everyone looked to Jackson. He thought carefully before answering. "She's a soldier. Same as us. She just wears the silence differently." Torres scoffed. "That's not an answer." Jackson didn't push further. He couldn't, not yet. But inside, he was certain, whatever her past was, it was buried deep, and dragging it into the open could be more dangerous than leaving it hidden. That night, as he checked her bandages one final time, Jackson leaned close and whispered words only she could hear. "I've heard the whispers, the ghost programs, the failures that weren't really failures. If you're one of them, you don't need to say it. I already know." Her eyes glistened in the lantern light. For the briefest second, he thought he saw gratitude flash there. But she turned her head away, slipping back into her silence. Still, Jackson felt it a crack in the wall she had built around herself. The whispers were real, and she was living proof. The first warning came just before dawn, a scout's hurried breath cutting through the desert chill. They're moving in. Multiple contacts, heavy weapons. Less than 2 clicks out, the SEAL camp snapped alive with urgency. Men scrambled for gear, rifles checked, magazines slammed into place. Brooks barked orders, his voice sharp and controlled, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed the pressure. Jackson crouched inside the shelter, his eyes darting to the woman on the cot. She was awake, her gaze fixed on him. For the first time since he'd met her, her expression was not blank. It was alert, calculating. "You hear that?" He whispered. "They're coming." No answer. Only those steady, unblinking eyes. He reached for his rifle, slung it across his shoulder, and turned to leave. But something made him pause. A flicker of movement her fingers, tapping against the blanket. 3 taps, a pause, then 2. Not random. Not restless. It was rhythm. A code. Jackson's pulse jumped. He recognized the cadence. It was a field signal, an old-school way to mark ready or prepared. He froze, staring at her. She offered nothing more, only drew the blanket higher to her chest. Minutes later, the firefight began. The first crack of rifle fire shattered the desert stillness, followed by the roar of machine guns. Dust erupted around the camp as bullets tore through the sandbags. The SEALs returned fire, moving with brutal efficiency. But the enemy was pushing hard-trained, coordinated, not some ragtag militia. Jackson worked frantically, dragging wounded men into cover, applying tourniquets, packing wounds, shouting for morphine. The air stank of cordite and blood. Shouts turned into screams. "Doc, we're getting overrun." Torres yelled, firing bursts over the ridge. "We can't hold this line." Jackson's stomach churned. They were running out of ammo, running out of options. And then movement in the corner of his vision. The woman. She had risen from the cot, staggering at first, then straightening with a steadiness that shouldn't have been possible in her condition. Her wound was still raw, but her posture was that of a fighter. "Wait, what the hell are you doing?" Jackson shouted over the gunfire. She ignored him. Her hand moved to the floor beside the cot, where a fallen SEAL's sidearm lay. With chilling precision, she checked the chamber, released the safety, and crouched low. Jackson felt his throat tighten. She wasn't hesitating. She wasn't fumbling. Every movement was deliberate, efficient, drilled into muscle memory. The squad hadn't noticed her yet. They were too busy fighting. But Jackson couldn't take his eyes off her. She slid along the wall, pressed her back against the frame of the shelter, and waited. The enemy advanced fast. 2 figures broke cover, sprinting toward the camp's flank. She moved. Her body flowed like water, rising, extending, firing 3 shots in perfect succession. Each bullet struck with surgical accuracy, 1 to the chest, 1 to the throat, 1 to the head. Both attackers collapsed before they even had a chance to return fire. Jackson's blood ran cold. Torres, catching sight of her, nearly froze mid-burst. "What the?" Brooks didn't have time to question. He just barked, "Keep shooting. Hold the line." But Jackson knew what everyone had just seen. This wasn't luck. This wasn't desperation. This was training. The woman moved with terrifying efficiency. She wasn't reckless. She was methodical. Each time she fired, an enemy dropped. Each time she shifted, she minimized exposure, using angles and shadows like she'd studied this terrain for days. One enemy broke through the outer line, charging toward Jackson with a knife raised. Jackson fumbled for his rifle, too slow, but she was faster. In a blur, she intercepted, twisting the attacker's wrist until the blade clattered to the ground. With a fluid motion, she drove her knee into his stomach and flipped him onto the sand. One quick, precise strike ended him. Jackson stood frozen, breath ragged. "Jesus Christ," Torres muttered from across the barricade. "She fights like one of us." No, Jackson thought. Not like one of us. Better. The battle raged on, but the tide was shifting. With her sudden involvement, the SEALs found space to regroup. Her accuracy thinned the enemy ranks. Her instincts spotted threats before others did. Twice, she yanked a teammate into cover just as incoming fire riddled the wall they'd been leaning on. The silence that had once been strange was now chilling. She killed without a word, her expression locked in cold determination. No war cries. No commands. Only the calm of someone who had done this before. By the time the enemy began to retreat, dragging their dead into the dust, the SEAL camp was battered but standing. For a long moment, there was only silence broken by the distant thud of boots retreating into the desert night. The squad looked at her. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but her grip on the sidearm was still steady. Her eyes swept the horizon, ensuring the threat was truly gone. Then, without ceremony, she ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and placed the weapon on the ground. Finally, she sank back onto the cot, wincing as the pain in her side returned. Jackson knelt beside her, hands trembling as he checked her bandage. Blood seeped through the fresh wound from her exertion. "You shouldn't have moved," he whispered. Her eyes met his, calm and unrepentant. "You saved us," Jackson admitted. "But you also just proved what I've been thinking all along." Torres stalked closer, rifle still in hand, his face twisted with shock and anger. "What the hell is she, Doc? Civilians don't shoot like that." "Hell, most soldiers don't shoot like that." Jackson didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was still replaying what he'd just witnessed. Brooks finally broke the silence, voice low and grave. "Whoever she is, she's not ordinary. And she's not done shocking us." That night, while the others debated in hushed tones around the fire, Jackson sat alone in the shelter with her. He changed her bandages in silence. When he was done, he leaned close and whispered, "You didn't just break your silence. You broke everything. They'll never look at you the same way again." For the briefest second, he thought he saw something flicker across her face. Regret, maybe. Or relief. But it was gone as quickly as it came. She closed her eyes again, retreating into her wordless world. But Jackson knew. The secret was out. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a weapon. And now, there was no putting that truth back in the shadows. The fire crackled low, spitting sparks into the desert night. The squad huddled around it in uneasy silence, rifles close, eyes darting toward the shelter where she rested. For once, it wasn't enemy contact weighing on them. It was her. Jackson sat apart, sharpening his knife more out of habit than necessity. His thoughts churned with everything he had seen. Each precise shot, each flawless movement, none of it could be dismissed as instinct. That was training. Training born of pain, repetition, and discipline. Training they'd all bled for. And she had it. Brooks finally broke the silence. We can't ignore this. She's not who we thought she was. Torres snorted bitterly. Thought? Hell, I never thought she was a civilian. I called this from day one. But now we're looking at someone who fought like she's been through Bud Hess 100 times over. Another SEAL muttered. So what's she doing here? And why the hell hasn't she spoken a word? All eyes turned to Jackson. He'd been the closest to her since they'd found her. If anyone had answers, it was him. Jackson set the knife down slowly. I don't know everything, but I know what I saw. And I've seen whispers of it before. Torres scoffed. Whispers don't save lives. She did. Brooks leaned forward, voice low. Then let's cut through the noise. Doc, what do you think she is? Jackson hesitated. The truth he carried wasn't complete, only fragments of rumors and shadows. But the time for silence had passed. I think, he said carefully, she's part of something married. Something no one was supposed to know about. The squad leaned in closer. Even Torres, skeptical as ever, didn't interrupt. I heard about it years ago, Jackson continued. Not from official channels. Just murmurs in the right circles. A program. Experimental. Off the books. They wanted to see if women could be trained to our standards, SEAL standards. One of the men cursed under his breath. They said it failed, Jackson went on. Said no one made it through. But looking at her? At how she fights? I don't buy it. Not anymore. The conversation dragged into the night, each man throwing theories into the firelight. Spy. Rogue agent. Abandoned project. But one question hung over them all. Why was she here now? Jackson couldn't shake that same question as he returned to the shelter. She lay on the cot, eyes open, as if waiting for him. You hear all that? He asked quietly. No response. Only the faint rise and fall of her breathing. Jackson sat beside her. They're scared of you. Hell, I'm scared of you. But I'm also alive because of you. We all are. Her gaze didn't waver. You don't have to tell me everything, he said. But give me something. A sign. Anything. For the longest moment, she was still. Then, slowly, she reached toward the edge of her blanket. Her fingers brushed the hem, tugged it aside, revealing more of the scars along her ribs. Not just injuries from this battle, old ones. Jagged, purposeful. The kind that told stories of survival, not accidents. Jackson's throat tightened. They did this to you, didn't they? Training, missions, something that chewed you up and spat you out. Her hand fell back to her side. Her silence spoke louder than words. The next day, the squad moved camp to higher ground. Enemy scouts were still out there, and Brooks refused to risk another ambush. The woman walked this time slow, pained but steady. No one offered to carry her. No one dared. As they trekked, Jackson noticed the way she scanned the ridges, how her head turned fractionally at distant sounds the others missed. Her awareness wasn't born of fear, it was instinct, drilled deep into her bones. At one point, Torres snapped. You think you're better than us? Walking around here like some ghost soldier, too good to even talk to us? He spat in the sand. I don't trust you. Not one damn bit. She didn't react. Didn't even glance at him. Brooks shut Torres down with a glare. She's here. She fought for us. That's more than some can say. Still, the tension lingered. That evening, as the desert sun bled red across the horizon, Jackson confronted Brooks privately. We can't keep pretending this is normal. The men need answers. Brooks exhaled, weary. And what do you suggest? Drag her out and interrogate her? She hasn't spoken a word. We can't force it. Jackson shook his head. We don't need to force it. We need to listen. She's talking in her own way. We just haven't been paying attention. Brooks studied him. You're in deep, Doc. Careful it doesn't cloud your judgment. Jackson didn't argue. Because he knew Brooks was right. He was in deep. Too deep to walk away. Later that night, while the others slept, Jackson sat with her again. The desert was quiet, only the wind whispering through the dunes. I need to understand, he said softly. Not for them, for me. You carry something no one else here does. And I think it's killing you, keeping it locked up. Her eyes glistened in the starlight. Slowly, she reached for the dirk beside her and began to draw with one finger. A symbol. It was crude, but Jackson recognized it immediately, a trident, simple but unmistakable. His chest tightened. A trident. The mark of the seals. But she didn't stop there. She added another symbol beside it. A circle, broken by 3 slashes. He didn't know what it meant, but the precision of her lines told him it was significant. Her fingers stilled. She looked at him, waiting. Jackson swallowed hard. So it's true. You were one of them. Or something like it. Her gaze lowered. For the first time since he'd met her, he saw shame flicker across her face. The next morning, Jackson reported to Brooks. He didn't tell him everything, just enough. She confirmed it. She was trained in something tied to us. Off the books, like I said. Brooks cursed under his breath. Damn it, if Command finds out... Command doesn't need to know. Not yet, Jackson said firmly. Right now, all that matters is survival. And like it or not, she's the best chance we've got. Brooks stared at him, then finally nodded. That day, the squad treated her differently. Not openly, not with words, but with a subtle shift of body language. They gave her space. They followed her gaze when she scanned the horizon. They began to trust her instincts, even if they didn't trust her past. Torres remained the outlier, glaring daggers whenever her back was turned. But even he couldn't deny what she'd done for them. And Jackson? He felt the weight of revelation pressing on him. The whispers he'd once dismissed were flesh and blood before his eyes. She wasn't just a soldier. She was proof of something bigger, proof of secrets, buried so deep they were never meant to surface. But here she was, silent, wounded, and undeniable. The truth was out, and it was only the beginning. The desert was too quiet. That was the first warning. No wind, no distant calls of wildlife, not even the whisper of sand shifting across the dunes. The squad felt it in their bones something was coming. Brooks ordered the men into defensive positions along the ridge. They set claymores, checked their optics, and rationed what little ammo they had left. The night pressed in like a heavy blanket. Jackson crouched beside her, watching the way she scanned the horizon. Even without speaking, she radiated certainty. Her gaze tracked the dark with precision, pausing just long enough to tell him she was calculating. Where? He asked softly. She raised a trembling hand and pointed east, toward the jagged rocks cutting across the sands. Jackson called it in. Brooks frowned but nodded, shifting 2 men to cover that flank. Minutes later, muzzle flashes sparked from the very rocks she'd marked. Gunfire erupted, tracer rounds tearing the sky. She had seen it before anyone else. The fight was brutal, worse than the last. The enemy came harder, smarter, using suppressive fire to pin the seals while their flankers crept closer. The ridge shuddered under the impact of mortar, dirt, and shrapnel exploding around them. Jackson threw himself into the chaos, dragging a wounded man into cover, hands slick with blood. Beside him, she snatched up a dropped rifle and returned fire. Her movements were no longer hesitant. They were decisive. She fired in controlled bursts, covering angles the others missed, her silence broken only by the steady rhythm of shots. But it wasn't her marksmanship that shocked them this time. It was her leadership. When Torres froze under the hail of bullets, she darted forward, grabbed his vest, and shoved him into a better firing position. When Brooks struggled to coordinate the team under the noise, she pointed sharply, directing flanking maneuvers with quick hand signals every operator recognized. And they followed. Without question, the battle raged into the night, each wave threatening to crush them. At one point, the enemy nearly breached their line, swarming up the ridge in numbers too great to count. That's when she stood. Jackson shouted after her, but she ignored him. She strode into the open, rifle raised, her silhouette framed by the burning horizon. Bullets cracked past her head, but she didn't flinch. Her shots cut down attackers with chilling precision, breaking their charge long enough for the SEALs to regroup. It was madness. It was bravery. It was both. Cover her. Brooks roared, and suddenly the entire squad was fighting with renewed fury. They poured rounds into the enemy, buying her the seconds she needed to dismantle their advance. In that moment, she wasn't just part of them. She was leading them. The fight dragged on for hours, but eventually the enemy broke. Their lines crumbled, retreating into the darkness, leaving behind smoldering craters and silence. The squad collapsed where they stood, exhausted and bloodied but alive. She lowered her rifle, shoulders heaving. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, every pair of eyes turned to her. Torres was the first to break the silence. His voice was hoarse, almost disbelieving. "She saved us." Again, Brooks nodded grimly. "Not just saved us. She commanded us." Jackson knelt beside her, checking the wound in her side. It had reopened, blood soaking through the fresh bandage. "You're killing yourself," he whispered. Her eyes met his, hard but steady. For the first time, her lips parted. A single word escaped. Rough, quiet, but clear. "Necessary." The squad froze. After days of silence, the sound of her voice felt almost unreal. Jackson's throat tightened. "You don't have to do this alone." Her gaze softened, just slightly. Then she whispered another word. Together, the men exchanged looks, their exhaustion tempered by something else: respect. Whatever doubts they had about her were gone. She had fought beside them, bled with them, and now, at last, spoken. Brooks crouched down, kneading her eyes. "You don't owe us answers. Not tonight. But know this: we follow those who earn it. And you? You've earned it." She said nothing, but the faintest flicker of a nod passed between them. Later, when the squad gathered around the fire, the conversation was different. No suspicion. No paranoia. Just quiet acknowledgement of the bond forged in battle. Torres, who had distrusted her the most, finally spoke up. "I don't know who you are, and I don't know what kind of program made you. But out there—" He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Out there, you were one of us." She sat apart, staring into the flames. Her silence was no longer empty. It was chosen. And when she glanced at Jackson, he understood her words were rare, but her actions spoke louder than any speech ever could. That night, Jackson dreamed again. Not of training this time, but of her standing tall on the battlefield, fire in her eyes, rallying warriors around her. He saw her scars not as marks of failure, but as proof of survival, proof of strength. When he woke, she was already awake, sitting at the edge of the camp, rifle across her lap, watching, guarding. For the first time since they found her, Jackson felt something deeper than suspicion or awe. He felt trust. And he knew the others did too. As dawn broke over the desert, Brooks gave the order to move out. They were battered, low on supplies, and still hunted, but the squad walked with new resolve. Because they weren't just following orders anymore. They were following her. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the rising sun, painting the sand in gold and crimson. The battle had ended, but its echoes lingered. The SEAL team, bruised and exhausted, moved slowly across the ridge, checking their perimeter and tending the wounded. Dust and smoke clung to their clothes, hair, and skin, the silent testimony of survival. Jackson walked beside her, his hands steady but mind racing. She had been a force of nature, yet she bore no glory, no complaints, only quiet, unwavering focus. Her side wound throbbed, but she remained composed, surveying the horizon as if anticipating another attack that would never come. Brooks approached, placing a hand on Jackson's shoulder. She did more than survive. She led us. His voice carried a mixture of awe and caution. And that changes everything. Jackson nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. She doesn't want recognition. Not from us, not from anyone, Brooks sighed. Recognition isn't what she needs. But the truth. Eventually, it matters. Jackson glanced at her. She walked ahead silently, scanning the terrain with meticulous precision. The scars on her body, once secrets, now told the story of survival, skill, and sacrifice. As they reached the temporary extraction point, the squad fell into formation, preparing for pickup. The silence among the men was profound, heavier than the gunfire from the night before. They had faced death together, and in the crucible of battle, her place among them had been cemented not by words, but by action. Torres, who had doubted her every step of the way, finally approached her. His jaw was tight, his usual bravado replaced with respect. "You didn't just fight," he said quietly. "You saved us. All of us. I don't care what your past is. I don't care what program or secret project you were part of. You're one of us now." She didn't respond, only inclined her head slightly. The faintest acknowledgement, but it was enough. Enough to show that the bond had been formed in the fires of combat, stronger than words could ever be. Jackson watched the exchange and felt a profound sense of relief. The woman who had carried silence as a shield, as armor, had finally earned the understanding she deserved. As the helicopter descended, the desert wind whipping around them, Brooks called out last-minute instructions. The extraction was calm, almost surreal, given the chaos they had endured. Jackson remained close to her, ensuring her safety as medics prepared to stabilize her wound further. Inside the aircraft, the others settled quickly, some leaning against each other, exhausted but alive. She sat apart, still silent, still composed, but Jackson noticed the smallest details, the way she flexed her fingers, the slight movement of her jaw, the steady rhythm of her breathing. She was alive, but she was also wary. Always wary. "Why didn't you ever speak before?" Jackson asked gently, breaking the barrier of silence at last. Her eyes flicked toward him, sharp and calculating, but not unkind. After a moment, she spoke, her voice low, measured, almost reverent. "Because words can betray." Jackson nodded, understanding more than she realized. She had trusted action over speech, skill over explanation. In a world where secrets could be lethal, silence had been her weapon, and survival had been her goal. And now? He pressed softly. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, outside the helicopter window. "Now they know who I am. And that is enough." Back at base, the squad debriefed. The events of the desert would be documented, sanitized, and classified. The enemy engagement was a success story on paper, but no official records could capture the full truth. No commendation would fully convey the courage, the skill, or the weight of the silent warrior who had led them through hell. Brooks watched her from a distance. He had orders, responsibilities, and chains of command that demanded obedience. Yet he could not ignore the reality. She was extraordinary, and the world would never officially acknowledge it. Jackson stood beside him, voice low. She doesn't want recognition, Brooks. But that doesn't mean what she did isn't legendary. Brooks nodded silently. Sometimes, the greatest warriors leave no mark, but the ones they imprint on the lives they save. Jackson glanced at her. She was already preparing her gear, checking weapons, methodically tending to herself like the battle had never happened. She carried no fanfare, no ego, only purpose. Days passed. The squad healed physically, but the memory of that night lingered. Tales of her precision, bravery, and calm under fire circulated quietly, whispered only among those who had been there. She became a legend not written in reports or awards, but in the hearts of those she had protected. Jackson found himself drawn to her side repeatedly, not as a medic, but as someone seeking understanding. They sat together in the quiet of the base one evening, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the compound. "You didn't have to prove anything," he said softly. "But you did. And you saved us all." Her gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "I didn't fight for proof," she said. "I fought to survive. To survive and protect. That is all." Jackson felt a weight lift off his chest. He realized then that she had never been silent out of fear. She had been silent out of necessity, discipline, and unspoken honor. "You'll never be forgotten by those of us who were there," he said. "Even if the world never knows your name." A small, almost imperceptible nod. No words, just acknowledgement. And in that silence, there was trust, understanding, and a quiet bond stronger than any speech could forge. Weeks later, when she vanished as quietly as she had appeared, Jackson knew the world would never hear her story fully. Command files would list her as an unremarkable survivor. Enemy engagement records would never credit her skill. But those who had fought beside her, Brooks, Torres, Jackson, and the others, would carry the truth with them forever. The desert had forged her, the battlefield had revealed her, and the squad had witnessed her legacy. She was a shadow among warriors, a silent sentinel whose name would remain unknown, but whose impact would echo across every life she touched. Jackson stood on the ridge one final time before leaving base, staring into the desert's endless horizon. He could almost see her there, silent and watchful, a guardian shaped by hardship, forged by secrecy, and redeemed through fire. And in his mind, her story was no longer just hers. It was theirs too, the living memory of courage, resilience, and a silent voice that spoke louder than words ever could. The desert wind whispered past him. Somewhere, out there, she moved unseen, unrecorded, unstoppable. A living legend, a legacy rewritten in silence. And the world would never know.